Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it is for you. Welcome back to a first Descendant video, and today I'm gonna showcase my Freyna build, and this will be a base build. No catalyst on there, no energy activators, nowhere, not on my weapons and not on the Descendant, so everybody can build this even before you hit the hard mode, as every single module on there is farmable in the normal mode. So let's get it started and start with, of course, her skills and what we want to focus on. Focus on toxic tech, as her 1, as her 3 and as her 4 are all toxic tech, and that's what we're kind of want to focus on. As her 2 is dimensional, but this will give you that extra survivability, and for now we are focusing on doing damage with our gun in combination with our skills. So make sure that you focus on toxic tech, especially around your reactor. The interesting thing is that almost all of the skills that we will be using will inflict room 0 trauma and will inflict poison to nearby enemies. But what Freyna wants to do is do more damage to the enemies next to the people that you hit with your room 0 trauma. When you fire your 1, you fire a toxic bullet, dealing damage to the enemies. The toxic bullet explodes, creating a toxic puddle and inflicts room 0 trauma on those who hit. Room 0 trauma inflicts continuous damage and inflicts poison to the nearby enemies. But if we look to the stats, room 0 trauma gives us a skill power modifier by 10.2%, while the poison will give us a skill power of 60.3%. So whenever you are fighting a group of enemies, always try to focus on the smaller group of enemies with your 1 or even with your 3, because then if you take out those smaller enemies, for example next to an elite, that poison will jump over to the elite and doing, instead of 10.2% skill damage, 60.3% skill damage. So as long as you know that, do not spam all your skills on the tankiest enemy, spam them on the enemies next to them, on the mobs, so you can take them on real quick and do the real damage with poison to the tankiest enemy, aka the elite. And that's something that you need to keep in mind. So making sure that we are building towards toxic tech, and of course then focusing on all the smaller mobs around the elite to do more poison damage. And that's kind of the same for our 3rd, because you are throwing down a toxic swamp, and enemies that touch the toxic swamp take continuous damage and are inflicted with poison and venom soaked. Enemies with venom soaked leave a toxic footprint as they move, and enemies who touch the toxic footprint are inflicted with poison. And again, this is kinda the same. As you can see, the toxic swamp does a continuous damage of 41.2% skill power, but the poison will do a 60.3% skill power increase. So we always kinda wanna make sure that we put the poison on other enemies, but with the toxic swamp, they need to run around, because those footprints will inflict the other enemies with poison. And then of course we have our 4th, and this is the gun that we mainly use towards bossing, like you saw in the intro, shredding through those normal void bosses with our 4th, of course, just beaming them down. For now we have a max bullets of 45 shots, but there's a little trick to up those max bullets that we'll go over a little bit later. And our 4th again has room 0 trauma and the poison. As you can see, the room 0 trauma ups the damage to 80.7%, but the poison damage does 471.8%. So again, you can, in a boss fight, put the poison on the boss and then get your 4th out to take out all the extra enemies around the boss, because then the poison will jump over. We have a duration of ticks of 471.8% continuous damage every single second. And that's another way to put poison on the most tankiest enemy, as for example a void boss, because they will always spawn those little ads, then take them out, and that poison will jump over and will do an insane amount of continuous poison damage. Now that we know all about the skills, that we know what to focus on and where to use it, how are we building towards this character? There are two different setups, and I will start with the mobbing setup, as that is just for the open world and whenever you group up. Starting with our reactor, you want to focus on a toxic mech reactor with then the Fallen Hope mounting on there. If the reactor says mounting, you need to make sure that whenever you use a skill, you are holding that weapon. As for example, purple reactors will show up as equipped, and then it doesn't matter where you have that weapon on your build, if it's on your first spot, your second spot, or your third spot. You don't even have to hold it, but this will instantly boost your damage, and that is what we kinda wanna play around with. So for the open world, just choose to go for your toxic mech reactor, as this will boost our toxic skill power, our tech skill power, and then try to find some toxic skill power boost ratio like I have, or of course some crit skill, or maybe even some extra tech skill power, but this is the one I found it. Jumping over to the external components, you want to focus on double rolls, especially on the aux and especially on the memory, as the aux can get a double roll of HP and the memory can get a double roll of defense. Always try to focus on double rolls of defense on the memory and double rolls of HP on the aux, and that will boost up your survivability a lot, next to of course our Descendant modules. For my sensor, again I went for HP. I have MP recovery in combat and character XP gain. I would love to see something else for that character XP gain, but that MP recovery in combat comes in clutch. And then for the last one, for our processor, again I chose to go for HP. I have some toxic resistance on there because of fighting some sort of void bosses, and I have a shield recovery modifier. Again, I would love to see something else boosting up my damage or keeping that damage alive a little bit longer. All of these components can have different roles and can have different additions to it, but they are all set. Of course, last week I made a video about this. I will pop it on the screen right now. If you missed it, check it out, as these will show you all of the roles that you can find on the aux, on the sensor, on the memory, and then of course at last on the processor. And that's what you kinda wanna focus on. Jumping over to my weapons, my main weapon, especially for the mobbing, will be the Fallen Hope. I got lucky with the rolls, but overall I would love to see that firearm critical hit damage replaced for firearm attack percentage. That will boost up my damage so much more, as the Fallen Hope doesn't really have a high crit base. So let's dive into, of course, our module settings. I went for action reaction for some extra firearm attack percentage, the fire rate up for, of course, some extra fire rate, and the rifling reinforcement for, again, some extra firearm attack percentage. And these three mods are kinda the base mods that you want to use on every single weapon, as this will boost up your DPS as the highest, and you don't really want to go into crit damage or crit chance with all of your weapons, because all of the base crit chances are different. Then next to that, I chose to go for toxic gun barrel, giving us an extra toxic attack of 20% plus and minus a 6% fire rate. Of course, we have a plus 25%, so we will still gain an extra 19% of fire rate. And then the last one is toxic enhancement, adds toxic attack equal to 30% of your firearm attack, and this will give us an insane boost to beam down all of the mobs or all of the enemies surrounding those void battles. Again, like I said in the intro, I did not work into any activators, I did not work into any catalysts, so everybody can make this build from the start up and fill in however you like to build it, as again again, this is a build template. Of course, there are certain ways to build it. There are best ways to build it, but still, if you are enjoying yourself within the game, if you are enjoying a certain playstyle, go for it and don't just randomly and blindly copy everything that we as content creators are doing, as these are build templates towards our own playstyle. But for our weapon, this is hands down the best way to do so for a base weapon build. Then for my secondary weapon, I'm using the Tamer. Again, this will be mainly used for boss fights, as the Fallen Hope will give you a decent amount of damage as well, but the weapon's special ability doesn't really work that well on Void Interceptor battles, and that's why I'm using my Tamer. Again, firearm attack percentage, electric attack, and weak point damage, and for the bonus firearm attack versus Order of Truth, I would love to see some damage to Colossi there, so we can beam down those Void bosses or elites a little bit easier. For the build up over here, again, action, reaction, rifling reinforcements, and fire rate up. And next to that, I chose to go for mental focus. Fire rate minus 10% when firing a firearm. Firearm attack plus 0.25% for 2 seconds, up to 150 stacks. Because we're running around with that LMG that has at least 100 bullets in the mag, this will give you another extra damage output. Just keep on beaming down those enemies. Again, I did not use any energy activators. I did not use any catalyst. So this is just a base Tamer. And look at that DPS. 375,000. This is hands down one of the best guns to use for taking out bosses, especially as a normal weapon, as this has a drop chance of like 50%, where other ultimate weapons, for example the Python, would be a very good weapon to use. It's a little bit harder to grind for. And then for my last and third weapon, we are using the Red Wolf handgun. And why are we using this? Because this will affect our fourth. Everything that we add to this weapon for fire rate, for magazine size, will affect our fourth ability. So what we will try to do is, before we do our fourth ability, we're switching over to our handgun, shooting it a couple of times, reloading, and then getting into our fourth. And that will bring our total bullets up to 67 instead of 45, and you can boost it even higher. And that's why I focused on rounds per magazine on these attributes. I have 11.7. It can go up to 12%, so I'm only 0.3% away from the cap. And then of course for the modules, everything goes into fire rate and everything goes into extra ammo. So we have expand general magazine, giving us an extra 50% general rounds. And then we got magazine compulsive, and this will give us an extra 39% magazine size, and the weak points minus 10%. But the weak point damage won't be affected for this, and this will give you the highest percentage of magazine if you want to combine two mods as the magazine size. And then of course we went for an extra fire rate to boost this up even more, and this will all move over to your fourth. And that's why you saw me beaming that void boss down with 67 bullets in the mag. What can even get higher, as again we did not go into any energy activators, we did not go into any catalysts, so this is a base version that everybody can find and use. And then let's jump over to our character build. We of course went into kicking for some extra 10 spots for our module capacity. We went into nimble fingers for our cooldown. We went into skill expansion to raise our effective range of our skills. We went of course into HP and into defense. And then the last one that we raised up is Toxic Specialist. And then next to that I have a Tech Skill Power modifier of 19%. And as you can see, I have 2 spots left. So you can kind of fill in what you want to put in there. If you want to get a little bit more damage to upping that Tech Skill Power, Or if you're missing some survivability, build it into HP, and then after that into defense. And that's kind of the setup for the open world, as this will give us some extra skill expansion that is especially from it. So our pools of our toxic will be bigger, we will be hitting more enemies, and we will be inflicting that room 0 trauma and of course that poison on the moist enemies while they pop their head and while they explode, even putting more enemies into that room 0 trauma and toxic. If we switch over to my boss build, there's only one thing that I kinda changed, and that is MP conversion versus, of course, that skill expansion. The skill expansion we don't really need if we're fighting void bosses, so I went for MP conversion, getting some more skill cooldown in, so we can get that fourth back even faster. And if we hover over that, you can see that we're getting it back within 51 seconds instead of that 110 seconds. So it's already more than 50% less on the cooldown. And if you have a hard fight, if you reach the hard mode, you definitely want to have this locked in so you can activate that fourth even more. And that's why I personally built into skill cooldown a little bit more, but the rest is exactly the same. We're using kicking, we're using nimble fingers, we're using increased HP and defense, and then the toxic specialist, and of course the tech specialist. And there are a few other ones that you can look for as well. If we go to access info real quick, you see focus on toxic and focus on tech, as these will give you some extra damage for tech and for toxic, but also give you that skill cooldown, what you kinda wanna go for. So if we go for toxic, if we go for focus on toxic, you see we will get some toxic skill power, and we're getting a skill cooldown of 6.1%. And that's the same with the tech version of it. Focus on tech, increasing your tech skill power modifier and giving you an extra skill cooldown of 6.1%. So those are the ones that you still can focus on. But for now, this is a very good base setup with your toxic specialist and your tech specialist. And then, of course, whenever you go into energy activators and or catalyst, you can even put those other ones next to it to get even more tech modifier and to get even more toxic skill power. And that's pretty much it. This was the whole breakdown of the build. This is the base build without anything added to it, so everybody can make it. And what you want to work towards is going to find Contagious. Contagious is the Transcendent mod for Freyna, and this will make this build so much better. But this is locked behind the hard mode, behind the Void Interceptor battles, so that's a little bit later on. I wanted to show you a base build first, but you definitely want to go hunt down this Contagious mod. And if we go back to the access information real quick, we can see that we can find this Contagious mod only when we fight our hard Dead Bride. So if you want to farm this boss, hit up hard Dead Bride. Take her out a couple of times or only once, like me. I got lucky by beating her the first time, and then you can farm hard Dead Bride for that Contagious mod, because it's definitely something that you want to work towards whenever you build into extra catalysts and or extra energy activators. And that's pretty much it. A little bit longer video because I just wanted to showcase everything, what every skill does, and of course what you want to build towards and what you want to have on your build as a weapon, and of course on your Descendant modules as well. Hopefully it helped you out and enjoyed the video. If so, make sure to hit that like button. And of course, if you're new here and or you want to be updated by the first Descendant, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. PurePrime out.